Once and for all, when will this unnecessary review finally end, and who's actually in charge of buying fighter jets over there?
Does the Canadian government need to buy the Gripen for the military for that deal to happen?
3 allied countries are building something that no longer needs U.S. approval to function. If it works, it breaks 80 years of control over Western air power. This is not a defense deal. This is a power shift. In March of 2025, Canada announced a formal review of its F-35 contract. 72 aircraft that had not yet been delivered were suddenly placed in limbo. Washington understood the message immediately. This was not a routine procurement adjustment. It was a direct challenge to American dominance in military aviation, striking at something far more sensitive than a single contract. And it opened a door that, once opened, may never fully close again. That door was closed decades ago. And it was closed by scale. During the Second World War, the United States produced nearly 300,000 aircraft. No other country came close. Through Lend-Lease, it flooded Allied air forces with equipment at a scale no one else could match. That scale became an influence, and that influence became dependency. By the early 1950s, American platforms were the default option across NATO. Training pipelines, maintenance systems, and operational doctrines all aligned with American standards. Over time, many countries operated advanced aircraft, yet remained tied to external approval for upgrades, exports, and the software modifications embedded within those systems. Buying the aircraft did not mean owning the capability behind it. That distinction is everything. And it shaped the next 70 years of Western air power in ways most people never stopped to question. Canada felt that reality more sharply than most. In the 1950s, the Avro CF-105 Arrow was designed to exceed Mach 2 and intercept high-altitude threats, placing it among the most advanced aircraft concepts of its era. Development costs exceeded 400 million Canadian dollars at the time, translating into several billion today. Despite its promise, the program was canceled in 1959. Tens of thousands of jobs disappeared overnight. A domestic capability that could have made Canada a leading aerospace innovator was dismantled in a single decision. In the decades that followed, Canada shifted toward American fighters and never fully looked back. That pattern spread far beyond Canada. Procurement processes across allied nations treated American equipment as the baseline. The F-4 Phantom, the F-15 Eagle, and the F-16 Fighting Falcon formed the backbone of Western air power. What began as a practical military requirement became an institutional habit, and that habit channeled demand toward a small group of American manufacturers for half a century. Then came the F-35, the program designed to cement that dominance for another generation. It was projected initially at around $233 billion for development and procurement. Its actual lifetime cost, including sustainment, now exceeds $1.7 trillion, making it the most expensive weapons program in history. Mission readiness rates hovered around 36% for extended periods. Engine deliveries in 2024 ran an average of 238 days late. Every single engine that year arrived behind schedule. Not most of them, all of them. The Government Accountability Office flagged the Pentagon for continuing to pay performance incentive fees despite those delays. That recommendation was not acted upon. Bonuses kept flowing to a manufacturer delivering engines 8 months behind schedule. The engine upgrade required for the aircraft's next capability block tells the same story. Originally projected to cost $10.6 billion and be completed by 2026, that estimate now stands at $16.5 billion, with readiness pushed back to 2029 at the earliest. At the Paris Air Show in June 2025, Pratt & Whitney's president of military engines declined to confirm whether engines would even be ready by that revised date. Block 4 aircraft continue rolling off production lines incomplete, waiting for retrofits that may not arrive for years. The most expensive weapons program in history, and it still cannot deliver on time. Then politics accelerated what industry had already begun. When Donald Trump returned to the White House, a proposed 25% tariff on Canadian goods sent shockwaves through the economy. Public remarks about Canada becoming America's 51st state triggered a backlash that crossed party lines and reshaped political opinion north of the border almost overnight. Prime Minister Mark Carney stated plainly that Canada needed to reduce its dependence on American systems. The F-35 review followed, and Sweden moved fast. Saab proposed something that defense deals almost never include: full production of the Gripen E transferred to Canada, with Bombardier as the industrial partner. The package included complete software source code transfer, giving Canadian engineers the freedom to upgrade systems, integrate weapons, and manage maintenance without asking anyone for permission. Between 10,000 and 12,600 high-skill aerospace jobs would be created. Canada would not simply assemble components. It would manufacture the aircraft entirely, positioning itself as a potential global export hub, including for future deliveries to Ukraine, which has already signed a letter of intent for between 100 and 150 Gripen aircraft. That offer exposes exactly what the F-35 program never provided. The F-35 is not just an aircraft, it is a system. Every component, from software updates to replacement parts, flows through frameworks managed by Lockheed Martin and overseen by the United States. Mission data routes through centralized platforms on American servers. Any attempt to modify weapons, perform independent upgrades, or share technology with outside partners requires external approval. Ownership does not translate into autonomy. The aircraft operates inside boundaries defined elsewhere. You bought the jet, but you did not buy freedom. If you come here for power stories hidden inside defense headlines, subscribe now. We break them down every week. The Gripen's operational record makes the contrast impossible to ignore. At Red Flag, Alaska in 2006, Swedish Gripens were assigned the adversary role against F-16 Block 50s, Eurofighter Typhoons, and F-15Cs. On the very first day of the exercise, the Gripen formation reportedly scored 10 air-to-air kills without a single loss. In one close-range engagement, a single Gripen pilot defeated 5 F-16 alone. In separate exercises with the Royal Norwegian Air Force, 3 Gripens faced 5 Norwegian F-16s, trained to full NATO standards, with Norway scoring only a single kill across multiple rounds. These were not marketing claims. They were publicly recorded by a NATO ally. When Sweden joined NATO in March 2024, ending more than 2 centuries of neutrality, the transition into alliance operations was immediate. Within a single day of accession, Gripens were flying intercept missions over the Baltic Sea alongside Belgian F-16s and German Eurofighters, coordinating seamlessly with NATO command systems as though the partnership had existed for years. In April 2025, Gripens deployed to Poland as part of NATO's enhanced air policing mission, conducting regular intercepts of Russian aircraft approaching Allied airspace. These were not training events. They carried real consequences in a genuinely contested environment. The engine record behind the Gripen reinforces the point. The Volvo RM12 powering the Gripen C and D variants has completed over 300,000 flight hours without a single engine-related accident. Not one catastrophic failure across 300,000 hours in a single-engine aircraft, where losing power means ejecting or worse. That number does not come from a brochure. It comes from decades of operational history. Meanwhile, Pratt & Whitney's F135 delivered 123 engines in 2024, and every single one arrived late. The comparison does not require elaboration. Operating costs complete the picture. The Gripen E runs at approximately $7,500 to $15,000 per flight hour. The F-35A regularly exceeds $46,000 per flight hour. Over a 30-year service life across a fleet of 88 aircraft, that gap compounds into tens of billions of dollars. For a country defending vast Arctic airspace across some of the harshest terrain on the planet, that difference determines how many hours can actually be flown, how many sorties can be generated during a crisis, and how long a sustained operation can realistically continue. The United Kingdom's role in this partnership centers on the element that may matter most of all: propulsion. Rolls-Royce, through its work on the Global Combat Air Program, is advancing next-generation engine technology that could power a new generation of Allied aircraft without any dependency on American systems. Current Gripen variants rely on GE engines, which bring American export control regulations into the equation. Developing alternative propulsion within the UK-Canada-Sweden framework would remove that constraint entirely. Export control over engines has historically been one of Washington's most powerful tools for shaping how allies use their aircraft. If a nation cannot sell its fighters without American approval of the engine, that approval becomes leverage in any political context imaginable. Removing that dependency changes the equation permanently. Canada's contribution through CAE adds the training dimension that rarely gets discussed, but proves just as consequential. Advanced platforms like the F-35 rely heavily on American simulators and training pipelines, meaning nations operating those aircraft often depend on American facilities to prepare their own crews. CAE's simulation systems are used by air forces in more than 35 countries and meet or exceed American standards. Canada, the United Kingdom, and Sweden can now build and sustain training ecosystems entirely within their own borders, expanding pilot numbers, maintaining readiness during a crisis, and eliminating the vulnerability that comes when training access becomes a political tool. The surveillance layer closes the final gap. Traditional airborne early warning systems, built on aging platforms like the Boeing 707-based E-3 Sentry, carry operating costs estimated above $40,000 per flight hour. The Saab Global Eye, developed in partnership with Bombardier using the Global 6000 business jet airframe, offers dramatically improved fuel efficiency, modern avionics, and lower maintenance demands. Sweden has proposed including 6 Global Eye aircraft in its Canadian package, with development work tied directly to Bombardier. That connection keeps the technology rooted in the partnership and positions Canada as both an operator and a contributor to its continued evolution. Taken together, these pieces form something that has not existed in Western aerospace for 8 decades. A complete self-contained defense ecosystem spanning fighters, engines, training, and surveillance, controlled entirely by the nations operating it. For the first time, the system is complete. No missing layer, no outside control. Now consider where that ecosystem needs to operate. Russia has deployed an estimated 40% of its military forces to the Arctic region, building new bases, expanding its nuclear icebreaker fleet, and positioning advanced air defense systems across the area. China has declared itself a near-Arctic state and invested heavily in ice-capable vessels, despite sitting thousands of kilometers from the region. Canada controls roughly 40% of the Arctic coastline. Defending that territory requires aircraft that can operate from strips as short as 800 meters, function at -40 degrees, and be turned around by a crew of 6 in under 10 minutes. The Gripen was engineered for exactly that environment. The infrastructure the F-35 requires simply does not exist across most of Canada's north. The geopolitical signal this alignment sends extends far beyond the 3 countries at its center. 15 NATO nations currently operate or have committed to the F-35. If Canada, a founding NORAD member and one of America's closest allies, steps away from that program publicly, the cover it provides to other hesitant nations is enormous. Poland has evaluated alternatives. Spain has not finalized its choice. Greece continues negotiating with France. Several governments are watching Ottawa carefully, understanding that Canada's move will determine whether the long-standing American hold on Allied fighter procurement can actually be broken. The fighter market, long dominated by a single manufacturer, would fragment in ways that reduce Washington's influence not only militarily, but diplomatically and economically. The American response has not been subtle. The U.S. ambassador to Canada publicly warned that walking away from the F-35 could put NORAD cooperation at risk. Washington framed the question as one of alliance loyalty rather than strategic choice, but the nature of that pressure has itself become part of the argument for change. When a partner nation uses access to defense technology as leverage in a trade dispute, the case for reducing that dependency makes itself without anyone having to argue it. 80 years of American air dominance was built on industrial advantage created during the Second World War, sustained through Cold War spending, and embedded into alliance structures through decades of procurement habits. That foundation has not disappeared, but it is no longer uncontested. The United Kingdom, Canada, and Sweden are not trying to replace American air power. They are building the capacity to stand alongside it, or if necessary, without it. And once one country proves it can work, others will not wait. For the first time in decades, control is no longer guaranteed, and if this system holds, the next war will not be decided by who has the most aircraft. It will be decided by who no longer needs permission to use them. That shift has already started. The only question now is who follows next. If this video changed how you see what is happening above us, drop your thoughts in the comments below. Share it with someone who needs to understand why this matters. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. This story is only getting bigger.